He thought I was just a grease monkey construction worker. He didn't know I secretly bought his company's building 3 years ago, until I projected the deed for everyone to see. My name is Ethan James Caldwell, and the city of Chicago is my ledger. Every brick, every pane of glass, every square foot of prime real estate in the Loop tells a chapter of my story. It's a story that began not in a boardroom, but on a splintered wooden scaffold, gripping a nail gun in the freezing wind, watching my breath fog in the air as I framed the walls of what would become my first duplex. 20 years. That's what it took to turn that single neglected two-flat in Bucktown into Caldwell Holdings, a portfolio that now holds the deeds to nearly half of downtown Chicago's commercial skyline. But empires, I've learned, are invisible to those who only read the price tag and never the blueprint. But before I detail the precise, public dismantling of a man who mistook my quiet demeanor for a simple mind, I need you to understand the soil from which this vengeance grew. If you've ever been judged by the dirt under your nails instead of the vision in your eyes, if you've ever been the silent foundation upon which louder people build their fragile egos, then you already know the slow-burning fuel for this fire. If you're ready for a story where the man they called the Help reveals he owns the entire building, then like, share, and subscribe to the Revenge Stories. Let's begin. My wife, Lauren, is the brilliant, incisive vice president of strategic acquisitions at Hale & Associates, a consulting firm so prestigious it seems to float above the grubby concerns of actual construction and physical labor. She operates in a rarefied atmosphere of leveraged buyouts, predictive analytics, and 8-figure forecasts. I am and have always been profoundly proud of her sharp mind and relentless drive. But in her world, value is a spreadsheet cell, success is a title on a door, and a person's worth is often mistaken for their alma mater. My world is different. My world is measured in concrete pours before dawn, in the satisfying heft of a steel I-beam swung into place, in the smell of sawdust and fresh drywall. I don't leverage debt. I build equity. I don't manage assets. I create them from the ground up. The antagonist, the virus in this otherwise pristine ecosystem, is Preston Hale III, Lauren's boss, a man whose personality was seemingly manufactured in a Harvard Business School lab. A uniform of bespoke Navy suits, a Rolex Daytona worn not to tell time, but to tell a story, and a languid, condescending drawl designed to make everyone else feel like they were wasting his precious, billable hours. He is a man who believes pedigree is a substitute for character, and that a theoretical understanding of business is superior to the tangible act of building one. Our sanctuary was our marriage, a partnership that had, for 15 years, thrived on the synergy of our different strengths. She was the strategist. I was the architect. She navigated the abstract world of high finance. I mastered the physical world of brick and mortar. But tonight, at the annual Hale & Associates Winter Zenith Gala, held in the breathtaking, glass-walled atrium on the 72nd floor of the One Magnificent Mile Tower, that sanctuary felt like it was under a silent, insidious siege. I stood beside Lauren, feeling the unnatural constriction of a rented tuxedo. The jacket shoulders were slightly too tight, a subtle discomfort that mirrored my presence in this room. I was playing a part. The handyman husband, the supportive, simple spouse brought along as a courtesy. Preston spotted us instantly, cutting through the crowd with the unerring confidence of a shark. He carried 2 flutes of champagne, bequeathing one to Lauren with a flourish, his fingers deliberately brushing against hers and lingering just a moment too long. Then he turned his gaze to me, a slow, sweeping appraisal that started at my serviceable but not Italian leather dress shoes and ended with a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Ethan, a surprise to see you here. Lauren mentioned you were tied up with a plumbing emergency in the South Loop." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was less camaraderie and more a pat on the head for a well-behaved dog. "Seriously though, man? Must be tough keeping up with a corporate VP when you're still out there in the trenches swinging a hammer. 2 different worlds, huh?" A few of his acolytes, sycophantic junior partners hovering within earshot, emitted a chorus of polite, nervous chuckles. Lauren's smile was a tight, strained line. Her cheeks flushed a telltale shade of pink, but she remained silent, taking a deliberate sip of her champagne. The frustration was a familiar, heavy stone settling in my gut. Months ago, I dropped by Lauren's corner office on the 50th floor to take her to an anniversary lunch. Preston was there, leaning over her desk, debriefing her on a client meeting. As I entered, he was slapping the side of the firm's expensive Italian-made espresso machine. Damn thing's choked again. Useless. He noticed me and his face lit up with mock relief. "Ethan, just the man. You're a hands-on guy, right? Got a set of tools in that truck of yours? Probably just a loose wire or a clogged coffee thing," he winked at Lauren. Grease monkey hands to the rescue. I'd located a hidden panel, pressed a recessed reset button, and the machine hummed back to life. "Just needed a reset," I said quietly. Preston had laughed, a loud, hollow sound. "See? Practical skills. Priceless." The label, Grease Monkey, had stuck in his mind. A convenient box to put me in. A few weeks later, I was in the same building for a meeting with the property manager about modernizing the HVAC systems. Preston stepped into the elevator, initially engrossed in his phone. He only acknowledged me when he realized we were both heading to the upper floors. "Ethan, what brings you to the big leagues? Got a leaky faucet on 60? He smirked. Then, without prompting, he launched into a boast. "Just inked the new 10-year lease for our global HQ right here. My doing, took real finesse. A work of art, really." He puffed out his chest. "That's the difference, you see. It's about vision, strategy, genius-level stuff. Not like just turning a wrench, right?" I had simply nodded, watching the digital numbers climb, thinking about the load-bearing walls and conduit pathways hidden behind the polished brass panels. The late nights became a pattern. Lauren's texts, "So sorry, another late one with Preston. Client dinner. Working through the numbers with the team, don't wait up." And then, the social media evidence. Preston tagging her in Instagram stories from the aviary, from RH Chicago, his arm possessively around her shoulders, captions like, "Sealing the deal with my star VP," or "The brains behind the operation." She was always professional, but the constant grating proximity, the public claiming of her time and intellect, felt like a deliberate campaign. He wasn't just her boss, he was an invasive species, slowly choking the light from our shared sanctuary. My silence wasn't assent, it was observation. And I was gathering data. The Gala was a symphony of polished superficiality. The 72nd floor atrium was a jewel box of light and money, with panoramic views of the dark, glittering expanse of Lake Michigan. A string quartet played Vivaldi in a corner. Preston Hale was the Sun King holding court, his laughter a little too loud, his gestures a little too broad. I remained on the periphery, a specter at the feast, my rented tuxedo, my ghostly shroud. Lauren was in her element, working the room with a polished grace, but I could see the faint tension in her jaw, the way her eyes occasionally flickered to me with a hint of apology. Dinner was a 7-course affair of tiny architectural dishes. Preston presided over the head table, with Lauren seated in the place of honor to his immediate right. I was exiled to a table near the kitchen doors, with the other spouses and lower-level directors. The conversation was a dull roar of market trends and gossip, but Preston's voice, as always, cut through the din like a scalpel. During the main course, a medallion of venison so small it seemed more a suggestion than a meal, Preston leaned conspiratorially close to Lauren, his hand sliding down her back in a gesture that was far too intimate for a professional setting. "Lauren, my dear, the presentation to the board on the Henderson account was nothing short of genius. That's the kind of forward-thinking, strategic leadership that separates the true visionaries from the pack." He didn't glance my way, but the shrapnel of his comment was aimed directly at my heart. Lauren stiffened almost imperceptibly, her spine ramrod straight. "Thank you, Preston," she said, her voice clipped and professional. He then raised his voice, projecting to our end of the long table. "It's all about scale, people. Seeing the forest, not the trees. Some minds get bogged down in the minutiae, the nuts and bolts." He gestured vaguely with his fork, as if swatting away a gnat. "But leaders, we build cathedrals. We don't lay the bricks." The dessert course arrived, a deconstructed black forest cake that was more art than sustenance. Preston stood, tapping his crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. The room fell into a reverent hush. This was his annual State of the Empire address. What a phenomenal year. He boomed, his arms spread wide as if to embrace the entire room. "We've expanded, we've innovated, we've set the goddamn gold standard. And that's because we have real titans of industry in this room." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over his fiefdom, a king surveying his subjects. Then his eyes, glinting with malicious amusement, landed squarely on me. with malicious amusement, landed squarely on me. "After all," he said, his voice dropping to a mock confidential tone that somehow carried to every corner, "some of us build spreadsheets that move millions. We build futures." He paused again for maximum effect, a smirk playing on his lips. "And others," he chuckled, the sound dripping with condescension, "well, they build birdhouses." The line in the sand was drawn. It wasn't just an insult, it was a fundamental desecration. It was the reduction of my life's work, my sweat, my calloused hands, my entire being, to a trivial, childish hobby. It was the public evisceration of my dignity, and by extension, Lauren's choice in a life partner. The room erupted in a wave of nervous, sycophantic laughter. Lauren looked down at her plate, her face a mask of utter mortification, her knuckles white as she gripped her napkin. That was the moment. The patient, observant husband vanished. The strategist, the architect, the quiet king emerged. A profound, icy calm settled over me. The 20 years of struggle, the deals, the acquisitions, the sheer mass of my silent empire, it all crystallized into a single, focused point of intent. I did not react with visible anger. I did not scowl or push back my chair with a screech. I moved with a deliberate, slow-motion precision that itself commanded attention. I placed my napkin neatly on the table. The linen was finer than any I owned. I stood up. The laughter was already beginning to die, snuffed out by the sheer, unexpected force of my presence. 400 pairs of eyes, previously glued to Preston, swiveled to me. The room fell into a stunned, pregnant silence. "Actually, Preston?" I said, my voice calm, clear, and effortlessly audible. It was the voice I used on my construction sites, the one that could cut through the roar of machinery without needing to shout. "I don't build birdhouses." I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was a simple, rugged model, a world away from the sleek devices around me. With 3 deliberate taps, I accessed a secure, encrypted server linked directly to the Caldwell Holdings central database. I turned the screen to face the room, though it was too small for anyone but the nearest tables to see. "I build the birdhouse you're all standing in." I then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod to a man standing near the AV control booth, my head of corporate security, Marcus, who had been posing as a bartender for the evening. He pressed a button on a device concealed in his palm. On every single screen in the atrium, the massive, floor-to-ceiling monitors flanking the podium, the smaller flat screens displaying the evening's menu and donor list, the sleek, minimalist Hale & Associates logo flickered, distorted, and vanished. In its place, a single stark, undeniable image materialized. It was a live feed from the Cook County Recorder of Deeds official database. The document was the title registry for the property at One Magnificent Mile. There, in bold, black, 72-point font, was the listing for the majority stakeholder, holder of title Caldwell Holdings, and directly beneath it, in the field for principal owner Ethan J. Caldwell. A collective, sharp gasp sucked all the oxygen out of the room. It was the sound of a paradigm shattering. The strategic awakening for this moment had not begun in weeks or even months. It had been a slow, deliberate process, initiated the very first time Preston Hale had looked at me and seen a tradesman instead of a man. A cold, analytical part of my mind had classified him not as a person, but as a variable. A predictable, arrogant variable in the equation of my life with Lauren. I understood that in Lauren's world, power was recognized only when it wore the correct uniform and spoke the correct jargon. My kind of power, the kind that could acquire city blocks and raise skyscrapers, was invisible to them, like gravity. The true planning, the architectural blueprint for this specific moment, began 3 years ago. I was in my office, reviewing portfolio performance when my head of acquisitions, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, slid a folder across my desk. "The pension fund that owns One Magnificent Mile is drowning. They need a quiet all-cash exit. Fast." I looked at the financials. It was a solid, if slightly outdated, Class A tower. A good addition. But then I saw the primary tenant list. Hale & Associates, Preston's firm, my wife's workplace. A plan, cold and perfect, began to form in my mind. This wasn't just an acquisition. It was a strategic positioning. It was checkmate, years before my opponent even knew we were playing chess. I conducted the entire $850 million purchase through a Russian doll series of blind trusts, shell corporations, and offshore holding entities. My name was on the ultimate ownership documents, but the trail was so convoluted, so deliberately obfuscated with legal firewalls, that it never triggered the commercial real estate news alerts that firms like Hale and Associates relied on. They were tenants. I was now their landlord. I owned the very air they were so smugly breathing. My alliance was small, fiercely loyal, and understood the meaning of discretion. Sarah Jenkins, my lawyer, who had been with me since I bought my first 4-flat. David Chen, my CFO, a man whose silence was more valuable than gold. And Marcus, my head of security, a former intelligence operative who could blend into any background and execute a complex plan with military precision. We didn't just plan a reveal, we planned a corporate and psychological takeover. The goal was not merely to embarrass Preston, but to demonstrate, in the most unambiguous, public way possible, that his entire world, his firm's prestige, his genius lease, his lavish gala, existed within an ecosystem I controlled. The digital takeover of the atrium's screens was Marcus's masterpiece. A simple, elegant script was uploaded to the building's internal network a week prior, masked as a routine software update for the climate control system. The switch of the security badges was already in motion. New ones for every single Hale & Associates employee, bearing the bold blue C of Caldwell Holdings, were sitting in boxes in the building's security office, scheduled for distribution the following Monday. The Gala was simply moving the timeline up for maximum dramatic impact. The satisfaction in the planning phase was a deep, quiet hum. While Preston was preening about his firm's vision, I was reviewing the structural schematics for the building's sprinkler system, noting the independent addressable zone controls for each section of the atrium. While he was making jokes about my grease monkey hands, I was ensuring that the digital footprint of my ownership was not just ironclad, but ready for a high-definition public display that would be legally unassailable. I was building my revenge with the same meticulous, foundational care with which I built my empire, surveying the land, laying the footings, and raising the structure, beam by silent beam. The silence that followed the screen change was profound, a vacuum of sound that seemed to stretch for an eternity. The only noise was the faint, melancholic strain of the string quartet, which faltered and then stopped altogether. 400 people stared, their minds struggling to reconcile the image on the screens with the man standing before them in the rented tuxedo. Preston's face was a canvas of collapsing reality. The smug, patronizing mask first cracked with confusion, his brow furrowing. Then, as the seconds ticked by and the screens remained unchanged, dawning horror flooded his features, pulling the color from his face until he was a ghastly, ashen shade of gray. What is this?" he finally stammered, his voice a reedy, broken thing. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at the nearest monitor. "This is a hack! A pathetic, juvenile prank. Someone call it now!" "It's no prank, Preston," I said, my voice still preternaturally calm, amplifying through the dead air. "The acquisition closed 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days ago. You and your firm have been paying monthly rent to a wholly owned subsidiary of Caldwell Holdings. You've been a tenant. A very profitable one, I might add." On cue, Marcus advanced the slide. The ownership registry was replaced by a high-resolution, watermarked scan of the final acquisition document. There, in stark black ink, was my signature, Ethan J. Caldwell, the same unpretentious scrawl I used to sign paychecks for hundreds of construction workers, property managers, and janitors. Beside it was the signature of the previous owner. The document was dated, notarized by the state of Illinois, and stamped with the official seal of the Cook County Recorder. It was devastatingly, incontrovertibly real. The CFO of Hale & Associates, a portly, nervous man named Robert Walsh, shot to his feet as if electrocuted. It's true," he whispered, his voice hoarse with shock, yet carrying in the tomb-like quiet. He fumbled for his tablet, pulling up internal records. "The lease payments, they go to CMB Holdings. Caldwell, Magnificent Mile. Oh my God." He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "Your CMB Holdings." The final piece of the reckoning was a touch of theatricality I had allowed myself, a single symbolic act of humiliation. I gave another slight, almost imperceptible nod to Marcus. The ambient lighting in the atrium dimmed by 20%, plunging the room into a more dramatic state and focusing all attention on the glowing screens. But for Preston, a more specific and far more visceral consequence was delivered. The sprinkler head directly above his chair, on an isolated zone control I had specified, let out a sharp pneumatic hiss, a concentrated, freezing jet of water, part of a scheduled monthly fire suppression test that had been conveniently mistimed by my building engineers. Sprayed down with pinpoint accuracy, it soaked only Preston, his now ruined Brioni suit, his plastered hair, and the immediate area of the table around him. It wasn't a deluge, it was a targeted strike. The shock of the icy water, combined with the total, soul-crushing humiliation, caused his body to betray him in the most primal way. A dark, spreading stain bloomed rapidly across the front of his $3,000 trousers, a stark, wet testament to his utter defeat. He hadn't just been outmaneuvered, he had been annihilated. He let out a strangled, pathetic cry, scrambling backward from the table and slipping in the puddle, landing hard on the soaked marble floor. And then, the most unexpected and cathartic thing happened. It started with a single slow clap from the back of the room, then another. It was a young woman, a junior analyst I'd once seen Preston reduce to tears in the elevator for a minor typo in a report. Then her entire table, emboldened, joined in. The applause spread, a rolling wave of sound that built in volume and intensity, becoming a thunderous, roaring, standing ovation. It wasn't just for me. It was for every person in that room who had ever been belittled, mocked, or made to feel small by Preston Hale's toxic arrogance. They were applauding the fall of a tyrant, the liberation of a kingdom. Lauren was still seated, frozen in her chair. She was staring at me, but she was seeing a completely different person. The tears that welled in her eyes and streamed down her face weren't from shared humiliation or embarrassment. They were tears of stunned, seismic realization. She was seeing the man she had married, not as the quiet, unassuming husband, but as the quiet, formidable force who had been moving mountains while she was busy analyzing grains of sand. The catharsis was absolute, a tectonic shift in the very bedrock of our shared life. The reckoning was complete. The aftermath was as quiet, efficient, and final as the acquisition itself. The Winter Zenith Gala ended not with a festive bang, but with a hushed, stunned, and hurried exodus. Preston Hale was not so much escorted as he was removed from the premises by two of my security personnel, his jacket draped over his shoulders to hide the stain, his head bowed, a broken figure shuffling into the night. At 8:01 a.m., the following Monday, a terse, 3-sentence email from Preston Hale was distributed to the entire firm. It announced his immediate resignation, citing a desire to pursue other opportunities and spend more time with his family. The board of directors accepted it without question, without thanks, without a single word of gratitude for his years of visionary leadership. They had all been at the gala. They had seen the videos that had, inevitably, found their way onto private chat servers and then, subtly, into the broad